Hi, everyone. Welcome to our interview workshop on the Stanford GSB. We are delighted that you are checking this out. We are really excited to put it together for you. Before we jump into the good stuff, which is going to be all about the GSB interview and what to expect and how to prepare for it, I want to take a moment to introduce myself and Gatehouse Admissions and my colleague that's here today as well. My name is Liza Weale, and I am the founder of Gatehouse Admissions. I actually did my MBA at MIT Sloan and loved the experience. So I think that's why I'm here with all of you today as an admissions coach, and really found a space that I love, giving other people the opportunity to go have that transformative experience in their own MBAs. After graduating, I joined Bain Company for a few years, and it's actually there umpteen years ago that I started coaching others on their own application process to business school. So I've been coaching for over 20 years now. And it's just a really wonderful spot to be in and to see, to help you on your journey. But I'm really excited because several years ago, I founded Gatehouse Admissions. I really thought that, especially with these schools like Stanford, Harvard, Wharton, just really what was the industry standard wasn't cutting it for these uber competitive programs. So I launched Gatehouse and pulled together and just an extraordinary team of MBAs from the very schools that our clients are most targeting. Again, Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, and built an entire service line around these schools and our support for our clients. We're really excited today to be here to share the sort of inside angle on the GSB interview, and give you guys some tips to walk away with. We're really proud of the fact that over 90% of our clients who apply to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton are accepted into at least one of those programs. And a lot of that's because of the interview. So that's what I'm here, along with my colleague, to talk to you about. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex to say hello to everybody as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Liza. I'm Alex Salton. I graduated from the GSB in 2022. Also graduated from Stanford in 2015, studying English. As part of my GSB experience, I was in the Arbuckle Leadership Fellows Program, which is an executive coaching and mentorship platform where second-year students coach first-year students to help them think through career trajectory and also just how to balance personal and professional aspirations. Which is why I joined Gatehouse, because I missed the coaching experience. I have several years now of coaching experience, but the time really missed that coaching experience. And I love to help applicants figure out how to tell their stories, particularly through essays and interviews. Before the GSB, I spent a few years at Goldman Sachs in investment banking, and then pivoted over to Harry's Inc., which is a consumer products direct-to-consumer company where I've held product roles and marketing roles. So I have deep experience also in e-commerce. And outside of my immediate professional kind of career roles, I was the former leader of Out for Undergrad Business. So another organization that focuses on coaching, this one through helping LGBTQ undergrad students find careers in finance, consulting, and accounting. So super excited to tell you about my GSB interview and also give you the tips and tricks that I tell my clients while working with Gatehouse. And I will pass it over to Liza just to run through some logistics on the interview.
Awesome. Actually, before we jump, we can keep this slide up, but before we jump, I just have to say, Alex, one of the things that even when I first started connecting with you that I loved about your experience is that you were an Arbuckle Fellow. I can't tell you how many of our clients, as I'm sure, as you know, aspire to be an Arbuckle Fellow when they're at the GSB. So I think that was just like super, your experience as being a fellow is super valuable, not only to our clients that are working with you, but also to get a better feel of what the program's about. So I think it's just a tremendous skill set to have on our team for what it's worth. But anyway, okay, so let's talk about the GSB interview. First off, if you are in the position that you've already received an invitation, congratulations, that's awesome. It's a hugely coveted spot to have. Only about 12 to 15% of applicants receive an interview invitation. If you're still in the waiting game, you're not alone. The GSB has a pretty long waiting period where this year, what they announced was invitations in round one would go out sometime between late September and middle to late November. That's a long period. We're dead center in the middle of it. So do not lose hope. That's my biggest takeaway for all of you, or headline. No reason to give up hope until they tell us that you need to. And they really will trickle out their invitations over the course of the next several weeks. So stay tuned. But again, here's what to expect. If you have gotten that interview invitation, or if you do, you will receive an email informing you, basically sharing the good news with you from the school. And then the school will just ask you, like, basically where you're located, what's going on with your schedule right now. And then they'll match you with an alumni, a GSB alum, who is part of their trained their cohort of interviewers. And then you'll need to schedule the interview with your interviewer. So it'll fall on you to reach out to your interviewer and ask them to get some time on their schedule. As I alluded to, or just briefly mentioned, your interviewer will be most likely a former or alumni of the program. The GSB has invested a lot of time and energy in training its interviewers. It's a group that consistently interviews. Obviously, every year there might be a few new people to the group, but this is a sort of a well-tenured group of interviewers, which is great news for all of you. It is sometimes the GSB admissions officer. Do not fret if you are assigned an admissions officer. It does not mean anything in the grand scheme. It just means that was who is available. So don't worry too much on that, on who you're assigned to, but most likely it's going to be an alumni. In terms of the approach, we get the question a lot of, how much does this person know about me? What story should I tell to them? I'm going to have a lot of information in today's session about that. But really, the headline for you here is they're only going to have your resume. So the immediate takeaway there is anything that you have already perfected when you developed your application, it's all fair game for you to explore in the interview process. No reason not to. So keep that in mind. They'll just have your resume. And in terms of the duration, it's usually about 45 minutes to an hour. So prepare. Some people go over, some people go under, but it's going to be a chunk of time. And the reason that it's going to be that chunk of time is it really is a conversation. And that's another big headline that you'll take away from today's session. But before we jump into the workshop, Alex and I were brainstorming how we wanted to put this together. And what we decided on was really just talking to our clients, talking to people that reach out to us about GSB's interview and asking them the questions that they have about the GSB interview. We figured that this is the best way to keep it really useful for you to explore those questions that are most top of mind or most frequently asked. So we've organized this pretty casually around these questions, and you'll hear from both me and Alex on the responses. But here's a big one we get. I'm actually going to ask Alex to tee it up first, but what is the GSB testing for in the interview? Alex, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure thing. So as Liza mentioned, the GSB interview really is first and foremost a conversation. There are specific attributes of candidates that the GSB is looking to assess. And I think namely, they're looking for alignment between the school's motto and how the person has kind of lived out throughout the various pieces of their life, whether personal or professional. But the school's motto is change lives, change organizations, and change the world. And I think that really permeates the school's culture across the board. And so when you're thinking about leadership specifically and how you're going to bring your leadership to the table in this interview and communicate that to your interviewer, I would think about it through that lens. They're looking for big change makers, people who've had large impact on their organizations historically, people who have had influence on those that they've managed. And they're really looking for specific details about how you've gone about your style of leadership in your professional life. You can also bring in pieces that aren't from your professional life, and I think we'll talk about that a bit later. But I would think about your story in the context of the school's motto and thinking about how you've led change and specifically within the organizations you've been a part of.
Great. I think that's I think that's a great answer. The only thing I would point out, and this is just underscoring what you said, Alex, is the whole leadership, thinking of who you are as a leadership and the stories that reveal it. one of the things that the GSB says in its material that it's evaluating you on is your demonstrated leadership potential. And so it makes sense that your interviewer is going to be wanting to see evidence of how you've already been a leader and what that has meant for you, in your years to date, which I think is great. Great. Okay.
And there's no right way to think about that type of leadership. So if you work in private equity, how have you influenced the way that your firm underwrites, or how have you brought deals to investment committee and driven change through that? If you work at a startup, how have you built out processes and streamlined operations? Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can take this to demonstrate your leadership. It doesn't necessarily have to be like large scale change, but think about who you are and how best to tell your story through that lens.
And the other point I want to make there, as you said, is like often people think that they have to be, have a title. They have to be on a board, or they have to be this VP of something, or they have to be a manager. And Alex, the examples that you just brought up, notice that you didn't mention title at all. It is much more of how you are creating change. And so if you don't have a title next to your name or anything, don't worry about that. Focus on what you've done and what you've accomplished and how you've created change. That's leadership in itself, and is certainly areas to explore as you're preparing for this interview. So one thing is, I think, and certainly when I started coaching many years ago, I think I fell into this trap where I thought the GSB interview was similar to a lot of schools' interviews. But as I have worked with more and more folks on the GSB interview, I've realized really how different and unique it is. So the next question that I'll go ahead and I'll take a stab at, and then Alex, I'd love for you to chime in a little bit more, is what makes the GSB interview unique. And to me, the biggest thing is, a lot of schools, they have this a little bit of I almost say standard roadmap. Walk me through your resume, tell me about your goals, why school X, tell me about a leadership experience, one or two other questions, and you're done. The GSB, though, the big thing that I think makes it unique from a prep process is really how much of it's focused on stories, your story specifically. And just to clarify, I think that's what makes it so challenging, because it requires you to be very in touch with who you are and your experiences, and very not necessarily comfortable talking about them, but willing to explore them and willing to talk about them. And bring a relative stranger that you're sitting across from along in your stories. And there's a lot of art that's required in strategy and strategic thinking, but also being in the moment and being true to yourself. And I think that is the part that makes the GSB interview unique from my perspective. Alex, I'm curious if you have anything to add to that, or any reaction to that.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think the piece that makes it unique is that it's relatively unstructured. So I'm making up a number here, but 300 plus questions that you could get, a lot of which are tell me about a time when, fill in the blank. And it requires you to be able to kind of think on your feet, but B, think on your feet, but really know who you are and like the stories that you want to bring to the table and what you want to communicate to your interviewer. And so I found it hard to prepare. And sometimes when I'm speaking with clients, they find it hard to prepare, because there's a lot of different ways that you can take it. But I would say the biggest piece is that it's not going to feel as rehearsed as some of the other ones. You're going to have to really think about who you are and tailor your responses accordingly based on the question that you get.
That's great. Good. Okay, let's see what's next. All right. This perfect tee up. What are examples of story questions? And I'll share some of mine. And Alex, at some point today, I definitely want you to talk about your interview experience, because I think it's, I've seen it run the gamut, but I think yours is pretty interesting. So I'd love for you to share that at some point. I want to wait for a little bit, because I know exactly where I want you to tell about it, but I will share this one. What are examples of story questions? Because this too, going back to what Alex said about being unstructured, I think that one of the things, the GSB, they have a lot of questions that actually can feel sort of similar, but you'll start spotting up patterns. So, some of this, I won't say standard, but I'll say standard. Like some of the questions that you are most likely to receive are things like, tell me about a time that you've gone above and beyond. Tell me about a time that you went beyond your job description. Tell me about a time where you saw an opportunity that others don't. Tell me about a time where you took initiative. You notice all of those questions are really teeing it up for you to show yourself off as a leader. I mean, I don't think it's accidental. Going back to what Alex said about this, the interview being designed to suss out who you are as a leader and how you've been a leader. All of these questions are giving you an opportunity to showcase stories where you've gotten out in front and really made things happen. So I'd say those are some common examples of story questions that you might get. You might also get someone's, tell me about a time that you had to work through or overcome a challenge or work through a roadblock. Tell me about a time where you had to work through conflict. Again, all these are designed not only to show your leadership, but to show who you are as a person, who you are as a problem solver, working through challenges and really driving impact. Those are some of the ones that come to mind for me. Alex, anyone to join, for any others to add on?
Yeah, I think there's another category of tell me about a time when questions that actually not only play into leadership, but also play into core values. So tell me about a time when you felt most proud. Tell me about a time when you had an impact on someone's life. I think there's sort of, that question is a bit different because they're trying to tease out exactly like who you are and what you value. And the school actually really does care about that when they're thinking about how they comprise the class. And so it's a way to show another form of leadership through your core values. But all of the ones that Liza mentioned are spot on and definitely come up in a lot of different interviews.
I love that. I love the way you described that to really, tease out your core values. I think that's powerful. That's great. Good. All right. Let's see what's next. This one's a great question. Given I won't know which stories they will ask about and which precise question they will ask, how should I prepare? I think can be daunting. But it was interesting to hear Alex say it was hard to prepare. And it is, but there is some preparation you can do. Even though you don't know what questions you are going to get, you can't. So that's fine. Live with it. But you can still prepare the stories. A good way to think about a good starting point is to look at your resume. This is just an easy way, and there are other elements that you can do. But look at your resume, look at all the bullets on your resume, and start identifying, the stories around them. If you've really spent the time on your resume, you'll be like, yeah, I already did that. I already know that. I've made my resume all accomplishment based. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you haven't yet applied to business school, you will do this. And if you're not doing that, definitely reach out to us. We can help. But if you've crafted your resume in the way you want to when you're applying to business school, you've really made it accomplishment driven. And so what that means is basically every single bullet on there is a potential story. So even as a starting point, think about, okay, what did I actually achieve and how did I do it? That is one way. Your goal is to come up with a cadre of powerful stories that reveal who you are. Another thing is actually to reread your GSB application. If you think about those impact questions, then we call them at Gatehouse, we call them the minis. They're mini in size, but still take a lot of time to craft, times when you've driven impact. Those are all stories that might be ripe for sharing. So really reflect on those, reflect on the most meaningful challenges that you've worked through. Look at those sample questions, but really figure out the stories in your life that demonstrate who you are and practice them. And when I say practice them, it's important to really dig into the details, to know the specifics, to know the context. And if you go in, instead of thinking to yourself, okay, if they ask me about a time that I've driven impact, this is the story I'm going to use. And then if they ask me about a time I've gone above and beyond, this is the story I'm going to use. Don't actually do that. Instead, know your stories. And what you'll find out is when you get a question, what we say is just kind of like flip through that mental Rolodex that you've just created of your stories and just serve up the first one that comes to mind that you can use to address and answer that question. We'll talk a little bit more about prioritization later, but that's like the biggest and that one of the key ways to prepare for the stories that you don't know what specific questions you're going to get. You can still do the hard work of preparing your stories ahead of time. And to also, this is where the STAR format comes in handy: situation, task, actions, results, and then reflection. That's also important. It's really important to the GSB as well. So when you're practicing your stories, share them, tell them out loud, and use the STAR format to make sure that you're covering all the pieces of those stories as well. Okay. All right. Let's go on to the next question. Oh, all right. So how should I prioritize which stories to share? So I have my philosophy on this one, but and I'm curious, Alex, any thoughts from you as you're coaching your clients on this, on how to prioritize the stories that you share in the interview?
Yeah, so I think this kind of dovetails nicely with what you were just speaking about. But when I kind of coach my clients on how to prepare, I tell them to build a story bank and have 60 to 70% of that be work related, whether that's company one, company two. So if you've worked for a couple of different companies before business school, trying to diversify up the stories and not just focus on one specific firm, but show kind of your impact more broadly. And then roughly 30% of the stories from outside of work. And that's because I think, clients can often get trapped in the mindset of everything has to be about work. And actually, that's not the case. Maybe you have a volunteer organization that you led through, a serious fundraising process, or you had to build a team for that organization. Those are also leadership experiences that the school really wants to know, because those also will speak to how you work with your classmates and how you get involved with clubs and other extracurriculars on campus. And so I like to say like 60 to 70% work related, just because this is a business school interview, but don't fall into the trap of only talking about work and really only talking about one firm. They're looking for impact and leadership more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think now might be, well, one other piece of advice I give is don't hoard your stories. And what I mean by that is sometimes people will be like, oh, I didn't want to give that story because then I wouldn't, be able to answer this other question, and they'll hold back their best stories. I would discourage you from doing that. Because actually at this point, I would love for you to share a little bit more about your interview. Is just, again, all interviews are going to be different. You need to be prepared for basically anything, but I do think it's interesting to hear about different folks' experiences. So Alex, do you want to share a little bit more about, because I think your example, it would have gone very differently had you tried to hoard some of your stories, is my guess. So do you want to share a little bit more about your interview?
That's a great point. So as I mentioned when I was introducing myself, prior to the GSB, I led a nonprofit organization called Out for Undergrad, which is a 501c3 that supports LGBTQ undergrad students moving into careers in finance, consulting, and accounting. They've now expanded into marketing, engineering, and a whole slew of other fields. But that was a really impactful leadership experience for me. I was leading a team of 10 people. I built the team. We raised almost $1 million to support the cause. We created all the programming for the conference. We brought a bunch of, so there was a lot of work streams that I was leading. And when I got into my GSB interview, the first question, and really the only question I was asked, was, tell me about the time you felt most proud. And so I spoke to this leadership experience. And I think what was really unique was there weren't as many tell me about a time questions that came up after that, but there were probably 20 to 30 follow-up questions specifically about this one experience. So how much money did you raise? Was it revenue? Was it profit? How did you manage the board? How did you think about comprising the team? What was the role of diversity when you were comprising the team? How did you play into people's strengths? How did you know when to let people take the reins versus you taking the reins? I mean, it was all very detailed, specifically about this one leadership experience that I had. And because I was leading the team and this was something that I was really familiar with, I was able to just speak to all of these things on the fly. And it ended up feeling very much like a conversation, although a probing conversation, about something that I was really proud of. And then right at the end of the interview, we kind of went through the why business school and kind of why GSB. And I think that was just sort of like to check that box. But ultimately, it really was just a conversation about something that I was proud of, where I felt like I had demonstrated impact. And so I think, to Liza's point, that probably would have gone differently if I had talked about something from, my days in investment banking or my days at Harry's. And I think, I could have spoken to those as well, but this was the time that I felt most proud, and it came through in how I was speaking about it.
Which I think, to me, the headline there is trust your gut. If there is a response if there's a question that is like, if you felt most challenged, what are you most proud about? What are you most excited about in life? Any of these questions, like usually 93 times out of 100, your gut, the first answer that bubbles up, even you might then get ahead and be like, no, I'm not going to answer it that way because it's not professional or something. Trust your gut. It's usually right. It's usually the one, that core answer is going to enable you to speak most authentically about your experiences, I think. It's good. Okay. Should I still practice the more classic MBA interview questions? Gosh, Alex, you teed this one up wonderfully. So yes, because we just heard about Alex's experience where, at the end, he was asked, why Stanford? Tell me about your goals. You absolutely, so even though our focus today has been focused on stories, you should absolutely practice and be ready for you to share more about your goals and why the GSB, why business school. As a tip for this one, I always say, like, you've written an essay on this very topic, by the way. You wrote your GSB. So at one thing we always encourage people to do ahead of the interview is to reread their GSB and just get refamiliar with what they put forth as their vision of the future and how they're going to leverage the resources at the GSB to get there. The other thing, that's all I'm going to say on this now, because I think we have another question about these more typical questions, but would absolutely these are they're considered somewhat foundational. And people sometimes say to us during their mock interviews or when they start prepping with us, like, well, I want only to focus on the challenge questions. I know all this stuff. But then when we actually say, let's rehearse this, let's practice one, let's practice walk me through your resume. And it's these foundational questions can be really hard, but they're also really critical. So you want to make sure that you're practicing doing them. So for example, how should I introduce myself now that you've told me I have to focus on this and that it's important? How should I do it if I'm asked, walk me through your resume and tell me about yourself? And I think, and I'm curious, Alex, chime in on this, but they're the two most essential things and tips that or ideas that I encourage people to keep in their mind is you want to have this idea of upward progression. So an upward trajectory, you think of your career experience today as not just a series of disparate random things, but that you're on a constant build and that's getting you stronger. So just in your mind, think upward trajectory. And then the other piece that I always want you to keep in mind is they see, by the way, they see the resume. The resume is right in front of them. They can be following it all along as you are walking them through your resume. So go beyond the words on the piece of paper and think about your motivations, your intentions, your reflection, your emotion. And what I mean by that is this might be getting ahead of the next question a little bit, which I think is also on resumes. But I think there's this temptation to just be like, I went to school X and then I started my career in this. And after a few years, I went to this other, I started my career in investment banking. I did a lot of really big deals, such as this really important deal. You can fill in the blank there. Then I transitioned to this firm where I've also, as in private equity, where I've led some investments and outside of work, I do this. And that's not a great walk me through your resume because I don't connect with you on a human basis with that answer. I want to understand why you can't tell everything. You've got to keep it short, but I want to understand a little bit more about your motivation, your intention, the emotional side of you that has given you the drive to forge this path forward that you have. So, thinking about either why these are sample questions as you start working on that walk me through your resume. Why did you choose the major that you did? Why did you gravitate towards the career that you did? what are one or two ways that you really demonstrated what you're capable of in each career stop, and reflect on the things that you've loved about them and how those things have given you further drive. It's just a better way to move beyond the words on the resume and to connect with somebody on a more personal basis in the walk me through your resume. Alex, anything to add to that?
Only to build on it. The shape that I use, so you used upward slope, I use narrative arc. So similar. And I think the big piece here is it's important to draw connections between the things that you've done and why. And so, if you've started your career in investment banking and then you moved over to, an operating role at a startup, why did you make that move? And what did you learn while you were in banking? And how did what you learn enable you to get that second job? And then trying to just tie everything together to show upward, to Liza's point, upward slope. But really, I think that there's sort of this element of self-reflection on why you've made the choices that you've made, which is what this question is trying to tease out, and to show intentionality around those choices.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is, remember that when you're after the walk me through your resume, have this in mind. What do you want them to remember about you? And that doesn't have to guide everything. You don't have to, that doesn't mean you reiterate the same thing a million times, but be cognizant of what it is that you want them to remember you by, and how has your path and communicating that path, how does that underscore what it is you want them to remember about you at the end of your walk me through your resume?
The only other thing I would say is with the business school interviews, I usually like to end the walk me through your resume question almost teeing up the next question, which is why business school, but not answering it.
Yep.
Because it gives the interview, it's almost like the interviewer immediately wants to know, okay, well, why does business school make sense for you now? So I'll pause on that, but that's typically how I usually kind of like leave that as the end of the arc.
Yeah, I love that too, because also this is a conversation and it's easy for you to then keep going. And then next thing you know, you've just talked for 12 minutes in a response, and the person's going to be like, woo, that is too much. But if you stop and you're strategic, really it's like, okay, now you've teed up the next question, but it also is giving the person, like, part of this really is strategic communication. The person who is interviewing you, they're spending a lot of mental capacity understanding, connecting the dots, filling in the blanks in their own head about who you are. And so you want to make that as easy as possible. So keeping your answers relatively brief, only answering the question that you've been asked, that's actually a really smart strategic move, because it gauges your listener much more than just kind of speaking for 10 minutes where the person is like, oh, I'm really trying to understand, but this person just lost me. So just keep that rapport, keep that dialogue. It can be a much more effective conversation. And I think that's a really good comment and good observation, Alex. Okay, so this one, what's an example of a compelling answer to why the Stanford GSB? So I'm going to share one of my strategies, and we're always trading and really working on our interview. You can tell that we just love coaching people on their interviews and helping them, which is so all of us have sort of our go-to strategies, and then also are always eager to learn from one another so that we can help our clients really shine in the interview process. But typically, when people hear the question, why the Stanford GSB, they immediately start complimenting the GSB. Oh my gosh, I love it. I love a smaller class. Everybody I've met is so smart. There's so much diversity. I really like it. So that's why Stanford. But really, all you've done is told a GSB alum all the stuff they already know. They already know all those things about GSB. What they don't know is actually anything about you. So instead of, when you see the question, or when you're asked the question, well, why Stanford? I want you instead to hear, what resources do I need to take advantage of at the GSB to reach my goals? So really quickly orient that question of, what do I need to take advantage of? Instead of don't hear why Stanford, hear the question that what resources do I need to take advantage of? So that's strategy number one. And the other strategy I'll say is that often you will be asked why business school, sometimes first before you get into the why GSB. And if you've already defended why business school, so let's say you are looking to pivot, you come from, let's see, what's a good one? Let's say you come from private equity and you're looking to pivot into an operational role. And you've identified a few things that you need to go back to business school for. Perhaps you need to grow as a leader because at this point you haven't really managed teams, you've just managed work streams. Perhaps you need to really put yourself in the shoe of the operator to understand trade-offs of really motivating a team, dealing with the fire drills that will always come up as an operator, working with different elements within your organization. And perhaps you want to gain more industry expertise and go deeper into whatever area, perhaps it's healthcare. So I've just teed up all the things that I need to go to business school for. So when now I'm asked why Stanford, I can start identifying, just match up what resources at the GSB will give me those leadership skills, will give me those operator skills, and will give me that functional experience that I want. So those are just two tactics. One, to switch the question to what resources do I need to reach my goals? And then two, to think about, well, I've already articulated what I need from business school. Now I just have to overlay how GSB will, address each of those buckets. Those are two strategies I say. And I'm curious, Alex, any other tips on how to really develop a compelling answer to this?
No, I think that was spot on. And I would just say one way to kind of build on that is make sure that you've done your research. So specificity is really helpful. I think, let's say you're interested in starting a company, which a lot of applicants to the GSB are. That's probably not the best answer. Like everyone at the GSB is interested in starting a company and entrepreneurship, and I want to be in that environment. But I think actually having identified specific resources that are related to the idea that you might have, or classes, or even anecdotes from people you've spoken to, just having more specificity when it comes to the opportunities versus less. But agree with everything Liza said.
Yes, research, huge, super huge. Definitely do that. Yeah. A good response to a question about conflict. We'll keep this one short. You should, when you're asked about a conflict, so a time where you worked with somebody challenging on a team, or when there was a conflict on the team, conflict's always going to happen in the workplace. If you haven't had conflict, you were very lucky. I can guarantee you will. It's humans. We're working together. This stuff is hard. So, one thing is, don't shy away from it. It's okay to think about conflict. We don't need to pretend it didn't exist. Don't shy away from it, but also always, think about the other person's perspective, not your interviewer. But if you are exploring conflict, what you don't want to do is just place blame left and right and take nothing for yourself. Again, we're all human. We're all trying to do right. And oftentimes you're just having different perspective. So one thing that we encourage our clients to do is really own or share that reflection and that observation and that recognition of the other person's perspective when you are explaining, when you're walking through a story about conflict. So for example, perhaps you are trying to get buy-in to move forward an initiative, and someone is really shutting you out. And you're worried about sharing that story because it really frustrated you. And so you don't want to go there in an interview. What I would say is it's absolutely fine to go there in an interview, and even to be honest that you were frustrated with somebody. But what's more important is, how did you work through that conflict? How did you figure out, gosh, what's really upsetting this person is that this person has no time to get this other project that is on their plate done? And how did you then figure out how to share resources to help this other person actually get that project done, to get them on your side? What you do want to do when sharing a conflict story is share one that typically that gets to a good place where you persevered through that conflict and can still work together. Sometimes that's not possible. And even then there can be reasons to share that story. But the two headlines here are, don't skirt too much away from the conflict. It's normal. It happens. but then also don't place all the blame on the other person. And really, even now, if you're reflecting on it, think about that person's perspective, and maybe, there's some learning in there for you as someone, getting, who's going to face more conflict going on. So those are some of the tips that we share. Alex, anything
I
else
have
off
just,
that?
one sort of, one thing to add. So the GSB has a whole handful of courses that are focused on resolving conflict. So there's dilemmas and decisions, conversations in management, interpersonal dynamics, managing difficult conversations. Within a lot of these classes, the sort of the key work stream that you're kind of diving in on is actually role playing difficult conversations with your classmates and working through them on the fly in front of your other classmates. So having to fire someone, having to hire someone, whatever it may be. And so I think with this question in the interview, if you can show that you've even attempted to have some of those conversations early on in your career, and to Liza's point, put yourself in the other person's shoes and thought through their viewpoint and why they may be shaking out where they are, I think that will resonate really well in the interview, because that is a kind of a core component of a lot of the classes at the school.
That's great. Good. What question should I ask my interviewer? Which I always find it funny that we get these questions because we're not their interviewer, so we can't really tell you what questions to ask. But actually, there is something there. The reason I say that is because you will be matched with someone, and I encourage you to just check them out on LinkedIn, see what your interviewer, what their career thus far has been like when they were at the GSB. And that's actually where you can start thinking about some of your questions. This is, again, one thing that would characterize, and I'm trying to think of what Alex said, but just like this kind of conversation, it's unstructured. That's the word I'm looking for. Said it was very unstructured. It will get personal. It could meander. It's going to be like a conversation. And I think, you said, Alex, maybe you said it's like still a little bit deep probing from the interviewer, but it's a conversation, and you should be expected when it comes to the questions that you're going to ask, like, it's your chance now to just explore what you'd like to. You're not trying to prove to them that you've done, about some really this one-off course at the GSB that you heard about, and you're trying to demonstrate all your knowledge. No, you could be actually curious about how their career has evolved since leaving the GSB, ways that they still interact with the GSB, favorite moments or ways that they got involved in the GSB. Think there's this piece of wisdom or advice out there that, like, you don't want to ask any question that's available on the website, an obvious question. And that's true, but it very true. Like, you don't want to be like, oh, I don't know, what's touchy feely? You would never ask that in an interview. Please don't. But like, that's an example of a question that, is not very thoughtful, because you should be able to do that research. But it's totally fine to ask more personal question about the arc of their own career, because this is a chance to actually learn from somebody who's been at the GSB, who has presumably leveraged the GSB and is now off doing pretty exciting things. And to take that opportunity to learn from somebody is great. So do come up with some questions ahead of time. 100%. You can be ready with someone and have questions on the fly, but do your research and think about some questions that you do genuinely want to learn about from the person. And keep in mind, when they graduated, they're like me, they might have graduated a long time ago. So, things like favorite classes or favorite professors, it might be less important to ask that person. So think about where they are in their own career, and you can still tie it back to their time at business school, but just be cognizant that they might not. They probably still remember their favorite courses, but it just might be less germane to the topic than if it were a more recent alum. All right, let's see. Okay, that's it, guys, for now. So let's, this is always, as I said, it's a great opportunity for us to share some of the ins and outs of an interview that is arguably a really big step in the application process, certainly a big hurdle to get through before that acceptance, which we'll have our fingers crossed on. So, essential steps in your interview prep. practice the basics 100%. So even though a lot of the focus today was on stories, practice those basics, walk me through your resume, why business school, what your goals are, and why the GSB. But then also spend some time identifying that, building that bank of stories or that Rolodex of stories, identify them and practice telling them. Use the STAR format: situation, task, action, results, and reflection. Remember the intention, the emotion, and the motivation behind your actions. You heard that when Alex was talking about walk me through your resume. You heard it also when I was talking about the kind of the emotional side of walk me through your resume. Even with the stories, just list things out. Think about your intention and why you're doing the things that you're doing to achieve the results that you did. Have multiple stories, 6 to 10, including some failure, challenge ones. Be ready to reflect on, and even ahead of time, reflect on what the stories could share about you, and know the specifics. The details matter. Don't wait until your interview to dust off that story about the time you turned around the performance of your soccer team in college. Practice it, rehearse it, so all the details are you're really fluid and fluent with them. Research the GSB, as we said. Reread that GSB-B. You've got a lot of the answers probably already there. And rehearse out loud, give yourself some feedback, and then do it again. Can't stress that enough. It's doing one thing in your mind, identifying the stories, but really when you articulate it, you'll find some areas that you want to improve on, I would guess. So then practice again. In terms of Gatehouse Admissions, so if there's just a few ways, ideally, you got some really good stuff out of today's session, but we have a few additional resources I want to point you towards. Number one, when you have gone through your interview prep, you can certainly do a mock with us, a mock with Alex. We also have other members of other alumni from GSB on the team who would be happy to do a mock with you as well. In our mock service, we're really, really proud of what we've developed at Gatehouse. You have a series of foundational videos to help you with those sort of more basic questions, but still very important, like walk me through your resume. We also have an interview guide that we've based on questions that have been reported from past clients. And then the real magic happens in the mock interview session, one-on-one with a GSB alum who's also a coach, and will give you really targeted and helpful feedback so that you're ready for game day. I know that some of you maybe have applied, you're still waiting, maybe it's not gonna, I'm hopeful it works out the way you want it to. I do too. But if not, if you end up needing to think about schools for round 2, reach out to us for a free consultation. You might be way early in the process. That's fine too. You might be thinking about next fall already. Give us a shout. We're happy to have a free consultation with you. We make it really about you, what's on your mind, and sharing sort of any knowledge that we have to help you on your way. And then we also have comprehensive consulting services. Again, this is really why I founded Gatehouse in the first place, was I saw a need for an elevated level of support for clients that are targeting these schools. And we're really just delighted to partner with you one-on-one for all the steps of the process. So I think that's it. I do want to say thank you to Alex. We have a great team at Gatehouse, and I was really, really delighted to be able to, recruit and pull Alex onto the team, because it's just been really fun to work with him. I've learned a lot from him, and just even in this chat, it's been a lot of fun. So I want to thank you, Alex, and I want to thank everybody for attending, and definitely reach out to us if we can help any more.
Thanks, Liza. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.